Imagine you are standing in the middle of a vast, frozen wilderness with temperatures so brutal they could kill you in minutes. No tools, no map, no memory of where you came from, and yet somehow, you keep walking, you keep surviving. And thousands of years later, scientists dig up what you left behind and realize they have no idea who you actually were. That is the mystery we are unraveling today. Because everything we thought we knew about the first Americans is being rewritten, and the new story is far stranger, far older, and far more fascinating than any textbook ever told you. For decades, the answer seemed simple. Scientists had a clean, comfortable story. Around 13,000 years ago, a group of hunters crossed a land bridge from Siberia into Alaska, chasing woolly mammoths and other megafauna across a frozen corridor. They spread south rapidly, and within a few thousand years, they became the ancestors of every indigenous person in the Americas. Scientists called this culture the Clovis people, named after a town in New Mexico where their distinctive, beautifully crafted spear points were first discovered in the 1930s. The theory was so widely accepted it became almost sacred. Clovis first, they called it. These were your first Americans. Case closed. Except it wasn't closed at all, because scientists kept finding things that didn't fit, things that were older than Clovis, things that pointed to people being in the Americas not 13,000 years ago, but 15,000, 20,000, maybe even 30,000 years ago or more. And every time one of these findings emerged, the scientific community erupted into fierce, sometimes bitter debate. Who were these earlier people? Where did they come from? How did they get here? And most haunting of all, what happened to them? Let's start with one of the most explosive discoveries in American archaeology. A cave in Chile called Monte Verde, located so far south it sits near the tip of South America. In the 1970s and 1980s, archaeologists began excavating this site and found something extraordinary. They found evidence of human habitation dating back at least 14,600 years. Wooden structures, stone tools, animal bones with cut marks, remnants of plants used for food and medicine. This was older than Clovis. And if people were already living at the very bottom of South America 14,600 years ago, they had to have entered the continent significantly earlier than the Clovis timeline allowed. The journey from Alaska to southern Chile is not a short walk. This discovery cracked the Clovis first model wide open, but Monte Verde was just the beginning. Because scientists kept digging, literally and figuratively, and the timeline kept getting pushed back further. In 2021, researchers announced discoveries at a site called White Sands National Park in New Mexico. They found fossilized human footprints preserved in ancient lake sediments. When scientists dated the sediment layers above and below the footprints, they got results that stunned the entire field. These footprints were between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. That means humans were walking through North America during the last glacial maximum, the peak of the last ice age, when massive ice sheets covered much of the continent. At a time when conventional theory said it was impossible for humans to be there. Someone was leaving footprints in New Mexico. This is where it gets truly mind-bending. If people were in the Americas 23,000 years ago, they could not have come through the ice-free corridor that opened between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets. That corridor didn't exist yet. It didn't open until around 14 to 15,000 years ago. So how did these ancient people get here? The answer that researchers now increasingly favor is the Kelp Highway hypothesis. Instead of walking through a frozen interior, ancient peoples may have hugged the Pacific coastline, traveling by boat or on foot along ice-free coastal strips, moving from Asia through the Pacific Rim and down the western edge of the Americas. The rich marine ecosystems along this kelp forest highway would have provided food the entire way. Seals, fish, shellfish, seaweed, all abundant and accessible. This wasn't a desperate trek through a frozen death zone. This may have been a relatively hospitable coastal migration that took generations. Now, here is where the story takes another twist, one that sends you back even further and makes the whole picture even more complicated. Because genetics has entered this field, and what Dina is telling us is extraordinary. Scientists have been analyzing the ancient DNA of the earliest Americans, and what they are finding suggests that the peopling of the Americas was not one simple migration wave. It was multiple waves from multiple source populations. At multiple different times. One of the most puzzling findings involves a population that geneticists have called Population Y, or sometimes the Ipikura lineage. When researchers analysed the DNA of certain indigenous groups in South America, particularly in the Amazon basin, they found genetic signatures that don't match East Asian or Siberian populations, the ones we'd expect if the Clovis route is the whole story. Instead, these signatures look strikingly similar to ancient populations from Australia, the Andaman Islands and Melanesia, peoples of the Pacific and Southeast Asia. How did genes from people related to Australasians end up in ancient South Americans? This is a question that nobody has fully answered, and it is one of the most tantalizing puzzles in the entire history of human origins research. One possible explanation is an ancient wave of migration that happened even before the main Siberian migration event, a population of people with deep Pacific ancestry who somehow reached the Americas, perhaps crossing the Pacific directly or moving through island chains, and eventually settling in South America before being largely absorbed or replaced by later arrivals. The traces of their DNA survive today in certain Amazonian groups, a ghost signal of a people almost entirely lost to history. And if you think that is strange, consider this. In 2020, researchers announced the discovery of stone tools at a site in Mexico called Chiquihuite Cave. These tools were found in sediment layers dating back 26,000 to 33,000 years. If these dates hold up under further scrutiny, they would push the human presence in the Americas back even further, to a time long before we thought anyone crossed the Bering Land Bridge at all. The scientific debate over these dates is fierce and ongoing, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But these findings are not being dismissed. They are being examined with intense seriousness, because the pattern of early American evidence keeps pointing in one direction. Earlier and earlier and earlier. So who were these people? What did they look like? How did they live? Here is what we can piece together from the physical remains that have been found. The oldest human skeletons discovered in the Americas often don't look exactly like modern Native American populations. Skulls like that of Luzia, found in Brazil and dating to around 11,500 years ago, display facial features that are more similar to Australian Aborigines or Africans than to East Asians. This does not mean these people came from Africa. It means that the ancient human population of East Asia and the Pacific was more diverse 20,000 years ago than it is today, and the first Americans were drawn from that diverse gene pool before modern East Asian populations fully took their present form. These were people who lived and died before the world we know existed, hunting giant ground sloths, mastodons, giant camels, and horses. Yes, horses, which were native to the Americas until they went extinct around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. They made sophisticated tools. They created art. At a site called Pedra Ferrada in Brazil, researchers have found cave paintings and what may be evidence of fire use dating back potentially tens of thousands of years. At Spirit Cave in Nevada, a naturally mummified man was discovered, dating to around 10,600 years ago, with a woven textile, one of the oldest in North America, found beside him. These were not primitive brutes stumbling blindly through the wilderness. These were fully modern human beings, with intelligence, culture, language, and extraordinary adaptability. And that adaptability is perhaps the most awe-inspiring part of this story. Think about what it took to be among the first humans in the Americas. You are entering a continent that no human has ever set foot on. The animals don't fear you. They have never seen anything like you. The landscape is utterly unknown. There are no established routes, no oral traditions about which plants are safe to eat, no knowledge of the seasonal patterns. You are discovering everything from scratch. And yet these people didn't just survive. They spread across two enormous continents, from the Arctic to the tip of South America, adapting to tropical rainforests, high-altitude Andes, arid deserts, and frigid tundra, all within a relatively short span of geological time. The sheer human achievement of that spread is almost impossible to comprehend. What is equally haunting is what came after. Many of the megafauna that these first Americans lived alongside, the mammoths, the mastodons, the giant sloths, the American horses and camels, all went extinct around the same time that human populations were expanding through the Americas. Whether humans hunted these animals to extinction, whether climate change at the end of the Ice Age was the primary driver, or whether it was a deadly combination of both, is still debated. But the extinction of these creatures profoundly reshaped the Americas and the lives of the people who remained. So when someone asks you who the first American ancient human was, the honest and thrilling answer is that we don't fully know yet. We know there were people here far earlier than the old textbooks said. We know they came in multiple waves from Asia, with possible additional contributions from Pacific populations. We know they were fully modern human beings of extraordinary capability, and we know that every few years another discovery reshapes our understanding in ways nobody predicted. The story of the first Americans is not a closed chapter. It is a living investigation with new footprints, new bones, new genetic sequences, and new tools being uncovered every year. And somewhere beneath the soil of this continent, waiting to be found, are the remains of people whose story we haven't even begun to tell yet. People who looked up at the same stars you see tonight, who loved their children, who grieved their dead, and who walked into an unknown world without a map and made it their home.